Good morning. Um, I wanted to continue just a little bit further on my husband's things. And I'm going to try to stop saying That is challenging. Anyway, I let's see, probably sometime in 2020, springish, I think. Um, our church at the time was doing a study called Listening to the Language of the Bible, Hearing It Through Jesus' Ears. And it's by Lois uh, Tverberg or Verberg with Bruce Akima. And I always like to give credit to what it is. Okay, so the reason I I love this study. Number one, I had been studying, um, I think through a Hebraic lens for several years by that point. And the reason I liked studying from a Hebraic lens is because Jesus was Jewish. And so his culture was vastly different than my culture here. And so when we study through the eyes of him, based on idioms and words and culture, then we get a richer understanding of Scripture. So that's what this particular book goes through. Um, 61 words. So, like some of the categories on the table of contents, there are Hebraic, like the first 8 words have to do with Hebraic insight that deepen our thinking. And that passage or that particular word is one of the ones I want to talk about today. And why I'm revisiting this is because a lot of times Bob and I would share a book, or he would be in a men's study, and a lot of times, depending upon the season of his life, he really did not read a lot of the books that he was in the class for, or he might skim it before and kind of get an understanding and then participate that way. But this study, he did participate or by reading. And how do I know that? Because this was his book. It was his copy. And he's got little notes written in it. And I can just tell you, in a digital age, and Bob read a lot digitally, so that's not really very fun for me, because digital is kind of gone. I don't know. It's just different. I can't tell you the joy it brings me to read through this book and see Bob's notes and commentaries. It's a gift. And anyway, I thought I'd share that with you. Have you found some of your husband's books, things he'd underlined? It's just like finding out just a different perspective of what stood out to him at the time, even. And I just wonder that for you. Comment in, in your comment, in my comments, and share. It's kind of fun. So this particular word, Da'at Elohim. So Da'at is the knowledge of God. And we can read this, it's based in Hosea 6:6. For I delight in loyalty rather than sacrifice, and in the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. When English speakers use the verb to know, we think of our mental grasp of facts. In Hebrew, however, the word for to know is yada. And yada is a much broader in scope and will enrich our understanding of the scriptures. Rather than just knowing information, the Hebrew idea of yada stresses knowing from experience and relationship and acting on that knowledge. When used in terms of knowing people, it can mean caring for someone, even being intimate sexually, For instance, the very literal King James Version reads, "And Adam knew Yada, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain." That was from Genesis 4:1. This idea is especially important when we learn about the biblical concept called the knowledge of God, Deat Elohim. As we Westerners may think this means to prove God's existence and establish a theological model to explain God's nature, but the Hebrew view is that knowledge of God is having a life in relationship with Him. We can see this way of thinking when we compare Christian translations of the Bible with a Jewish translation. The NIV version has Isaiah 11:12, "The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom." So the Spirit of the Lord, the Spirit of wisdom, understanding, the Spirit of counsel and power, the Spirit of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. But the Tanakh by the Jewish Publication Society reads, "The Spirit of the Lord shall alight upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, a spirit of counsel and valor, a spirit of devotion and reverence of the Lord." Hebraically, knowledge is not just knowing who someone is, it is devotion to them as well. Jews seek knowledge of God as intimacy with God. Knowing him as a son does his father, and as a wife, her husband. We should think of that when we share our faith. Are we trying to fill people's minds with facts? Or are we bringing people to know the Lord personally? How well do we know ourselves? In the ministry of En-Gedi, which is the people who published this book, or the ministry behind this book, we have struggled with how to communicate that our ministry is educational but devotional in nature. That we want to bring people closer to the Lord by understanding the Bible in its context. A verse we felt we had been given was, "For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." Isaiah 11:9. And also Habakkuk 2:14. When we read in a Jewish translation, we finally grasped the greater, or when we read in a Jewish translation, we finally grasped the greater meaning of the verse. It says, "The earth shall be filled with devotion to the Lord, as waters cover the sea." Isaiah 11:9. So, a few things on that. So, like, when you think about, like, let's just say, like, you might have connected with somebody at a meeting, or one of your kids' soccer games or something like that, and you might know them, and so you might follow them on Facebook or social media, and so you kind of know them, right? You know who they are. You could identify them. You can connect with them in the capacity that you have met them, but you don't really know them, right? You know about them, but you don't know them. So I think from a widow's gift perspective, I think back on all the times, marriage is so good, can be so good and so rich, and but you have to really work towards it, right? You can't just, like, well, you think you know about marriage before you enter it yourself, and then you learn while you're in it. So, anyway, I remember one time, Bob and I were planning to foster again, and while we were praying about it, and I asked him to put it before the Lord, and I would do the same, and see what the Lord would have us do, because we had already been down a couple of journeys with foster care, and it just didn't really work for our family. And so anyway, we put the matter before the Lord, And I remember plain as day, we were at Target one night on a date night. I think we'd gone out and stopped in there for something. And uh, I was like, well, I think the Lord led me to a certain scripture, but I want to hear yours first. And so he told me James 1:27. And I remember like bopping him on the arm, like, get out. That's exactly the one he led me to. So, anyway, that is true intimacy. Um, he and I, and then with the Lord. And just many times I would say something, and Bob would be like, I knew you were going to say that, or I was just going to say that. And I treasure all those times, I really do. And it took a lot of healing of our inner wounds, our souls from childhood, um, chiseling away at ourself, our own pride, our own perceptions of marriage, and our own perception of ourselves, actually. So, after 26 years of marriage and 2 years of dating, so 28 years together, we had really gotten to the point, I would say, of yada. And that is why um, when it was time to release Bob, I knew he was ready, and that's what he also wanted. And how could he communicate that to me? He was intubated, he was trached, but I knew his body language told me, his actions, and I knew on this particular day that he was ready. He was tired of the fight, and so I surrendered my will. So my hope for you is that first of all, that you dig into scripture and you grow closer in the Lord, and develop that intimacy, if you don't have that, with the God of the universe, you guys. It's quite amazing. And think about these special thoughts today about the knowledge of God. Do you know God? Do you know about God? Or do you know God? Think about that. Ask questions if you have them. That's my gift for you today.